Hey everybody, welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have Chris Matthews back with us today. We'll chat with Chris in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Chris Matthews is a journalist and political commentator, columnist, author, television host, and professor. His 15 years in politics and government includes speechwriter for President Jimmy Carter, administrative assistant to House Speaker Tip O'Neill, columnist for the San Francisco Chronicle, syndicated columnist and Washington bureau chief for the San Francisco Examiner, and host of MSNBC's Hardball. His books include 2011's Jack Kennedy, Elusive Hero, and his 2021 memoir, This Country, My Life on Politics and History. Chris, welcome back into the back room.
Thank you. Nice to be there.
So let's get right into it. What's keeping Chris Matthews up at night right now?
Well, it's the ability of President Trump to dictate to the MAGA people what to think, which is a remarkable achievement. He said he had the 2020 election stolen, and they don't have any evidence that it was stolen. He lost by 7 million votes in the popular vote. He lost rather clearly in the Electoral College. And no one has ever pointed to the states that were stolen from him. With Zelensky the other day, he said it was great television. He humiliated Zelensky. He won the argument, I guess. And then the other night, Tuesday night, he spoke to the American people, a dramatic audience, I imagine. And he said, the Social Security Administration is paying out to people who are aged 160, 20 million people. I counted it up. And he did it with such thoroughness that I am convinced that most MAGA people believe what he said, and a lot of independents and some Democrats are worried that their Social Security check is being handled by idiots that don't even know what the obit page is, that think people really live to 160 and are paying them checks. This is the kind of idea that gets into people's heads and doesn't get out of it. Unless somebody on national television within seconds of the president says he's not telling the truth. And the Democrats, of course, didn't do that, which is perfect, which is exactly what they're good for right now. That kind of perfect failure to communicate. And I think the next person on the list, so it was stolen elections. It was Zelensky's no good. We have a decrepit, dishonest Social Security system. And now the next one's going to be Amy Coney Barrett. They're going after her with all the guns blazing, and they're going to try to humiliate her personally so that the average, already some, but the average MAGA person is talking like Trump talks, which is their amazing ability to raise the hearing ability of the MAGA people to just hear what they want them to say and think. So MAGA is in such powerful control of the Republican Party because Donald Trump can dictate to it. And so the average senator, no matter how smart these Republican senators are, they have to answer to MAGA. And whatever Trump tells them, MAGA believes. And that's a fact. But I have family members like this. I know what it's like. They accept it. And they will not turn against Trump.
Yeah, but going after the waste and fraud in Social Security or anywhere else for that matter in government is fine. It's all fun and games about, Musk can go get the fraud and the waste. What happens when their check starts to become delayed or doesn't come?
People go to their mailboxes. We get notice that they get their checks. I get mine electronically. I'm very happy. I do check it once in a while to make sure it's clearly coming through. And fortunately, I don't rely on it entirely, but I had a good years behind me. But to a lot of people, it's the foundation of their retirement. In fact, since corporations have, in many cases, dropped their pensions, they have the 401, but this is really the heart of it. And if the 401 goes down, this is it. So I've always said about Pennsylvania, where I'm sort of aware of, Donald Trump wins Pennsylvania pretty well, or loses it slightly, because he understands that the average Pennsylvanian is not going anywhere. They're not going to Naples, Florida. They're not going to someplace on the Caribbean. They don't have a plan to do that every Christmas. They stay home and it gets cold and they need the Social Security check and they need the Medicare check. And in many cases for Alzheimer's, fairly or not, they need the Medicaid. And so the other thing they don't like is they don't like China. So Trump's in agreement with on China. They don't like China because they want their kids to come home once in a while. They don't want them living in Silicon Valley or Route 128. They want them living in the state, close enough to drive home on weekends once in a while. That's what they want. That's all they want. They are not demanding people, Pennsylvanians. They want the social programs that they paid for when they were working for the time that they were 15 to they're 65. And they want them left alone, and they want to punch China a little bit. That's what they want. So Trump is popular for that.
So, but when you look at the chaos and the slashing of federal spending, the terminations,
it's happening.
It's happening. Isn't there a point to where some of these Trump voters, not the hardcore, Biden was never president because he was in Gitmo and JFK Jr. was really the president, not that crowd, but the people who just want cheaper eggs and are not happy with stuff, isn't there going to be a point, maybe it's not today, although we do see it starting a little bit, isn't there going to be a point where enough of them start to say, this is not the shit I voted for?
Well,
and
the first time they opened a can of tuna fish, not tuna, we say tuna fish in Philly. The first time they open a can of tuna fish and they get ptomaine poisoning, they will care about the FBI. The next time they have their bank robbed and the FBI doesn't catch the person, although they're really good at catching people. And any kind of flight misdirection by air traffic controllers is scary. Apparently, every time you fly into DCA now, into Reagan, they tell you there's a plane crossing 180 degrees in front of you, so you got to pull out. You got to board the landing. I mean, these people are boarding. That's scary. When you have to board the landing.
We're laughing, but it is scary. It is scary. I mean, I just flew the last couple of days, and I was more scared than I've ever been flying, and I've flown 1,000,000 miles. So I do think there's going to be a backfire. We're starting to see that.
You know, I went through this to a lesser extent with President Reagan, and I was Tip O'Neill's guy. And we managed to win back 26 seats in 1982 after having lost 33 in 1980. Which was a pretty good comeback. And then we were smash-a-root in 84. So I think there's the congressional level argument, which is prices and day-to-day incidences and feelings. But the question of whether Trump wins in the big argument, like Nixon did in 72 or Reagan did in 84. Now, Trump can't run again. So, if there is a reasonable facsimile out there, we haven't met that person, which is interesting. There's no Trumpite. You know, for years, a lot of people who worked for the Kennedys would run for office. They all lost. Because people knew they weren't Kennedys. They weren't Jack and they weren't Bobby. And they really weren't up to snuff. So people know the difference between the actual product and the facsimile. And I get the feeling Trump's got to come up with a really good Trump for 2018. But in the short term, the House is very close to going either way. The Democrats might be able to drum up enough seats in New York State and California, but I don't think that will win the argument. I think they can't win it on inflation. They've got to get over this cultural problem, and the cultural thing is, it just seems like I watched them. They didn't even applaud Trump on closing the border. Well, isn't that okay to make American law obeyed? Is there a problem here?
And this is a question I want to ask you. It's if we truly believe that democracy is hanging on by a thread, which a lot of people in and out of Washington believe, based on his actions and his words, then Democrats seem lost. They don't know how to meet this moment. And I think we saw that Tuesday night. I mean, I'm sorry if people out there think pink outfits and little auction paddles are going to win in a
Those
gun
little
in a
lollipops.
gunfight, they bring the
Those
Fed.
lollipops.
Yeah. What?
And Congressman Green is not going to make the case from Texas. But let me tell you something that's so interesting. Let's talk about media bias. The New York Times came out 3 weeks ago on a Monday. They buried it below the fold on page 15. Like, pay very attention to this. This was their poll on how the 2020 election went the way that it did. And it had very particular information, but they weren't proud of it because it didn't match what you read in the New York Times. Number one, the argument of inflation, mainly, and the border, immigration, were the two most profound issues affecting voters. And they were also the issues most profoundly promoted by the Republican Party. So they were dead center. They nailed it. The Democrats' issues were abortion and LGBT rights that did not have any impact on the voter. The voter said, these are not interesting to me. I'm not voting on them, but I am going to vote on the others. Now, why would the Times bury that on page 15? The story of the 2020 election, because it completely conflicts with their front page every day, which is always about sexual, social, gender rights. It's never ending. I'm telling you, when you pick up the paper, you're looking for a good Democratic argument, and there that stuff is again and again. It matches up with the ad that ran all through the World Series, the ad that the Republicans spend zillions on, and apparently worked quite well. The big, tall guy competing in women's sports. Now, why would the Democrats not stand up and applaud Trump for closing the border? Why did everything he said on what I just described on this gender, whatever you call it, social front, none of that they stood for and applauded? They are still back where they wanted to run the campaign. They wanted to run on issues that cannot connect positively with the American vote. They just can't. So why are they doing it? Interest groups, the usual stuff. Why are they? I think they appeal to Hispanic leaders, not that they had a Hispanic voter, but the Hispanic leaders. Somewhere in there, they think the smart move is to be for illegal border crossings and defending people here who have crossed illegally, dress it up by calling it undocumented, but basically defending the law breaking. And then defending, obviously, it's good smarts to be against deportation, but they're generally on the wrong side of the whole issue. And I wonder why they do that. Why they do? Because they're afraid. The leadership is afraid of the other leadership of the Hispanic community. And, 37% of the vote of the Jewish community went for Trump. And that's pretty profound, given the fact that they look like they're in bed with Netanyahu, the Democrats. They seem like it. Joe Biden never whispered.
But now he's having direct talks with Hamas. So Israel's pissed off. Jews are pissed off. I'm a Jew. I'm pissed off. Why are you talking to Hamas? We don't negotiate with terrorists. What happened to that?
Well, that was a rule we had, pretty firm one. I think it cost Andy, what's his name, the former ambassador to the United Nations, his job.
Oh, yeah.
And
it
was a killer for him.
So look, I want to ask you this because this is the heart of the issue. We are apparently, according to a lot of Democrats, in a battle for the survival of democracy. What would Chris Matthews tell Hakeem Jeffries and Schumer to do in this dire situation?
Schumer, take a break, go to the showers. He puts his head down. He's in that kind of mood. It's just like, is it all this grieving? Stop grieving. Put your head up and talk to the American people because you can do it. He's a smart guy.
And what should he say? What should he say?
Jeffries, another smart guy. But if they don't want to be the leaders of the party, they got to pick leaders. If they don't think that because of ethnic reasons or the East Coast, West Coast, left coast, it's always the Democrats' problem. We got Nancy Pelosi, was brilliant, but she's from San Francisco. We don't pick people from Omaha. When the Democrats never pick somebody from Omaha or Michigan or anywhere in the middle. So we got these coasts. When you pick them as a leader, you gotta respect them. I don't know why Hakeem Jeffries, who everybody, Steny Hoyer liked him, Nancy Pelosi liked him, everybody liked him. They all thought he was at least as publicly presentable, to be blunt about it, as Barack Obama. He can stand on a platform. He's an attractive guy. Why isn't he the leader? He didn't say jack on Tuesday night. Mm-hmm. Where was he hiding? They put out Slotkin, who was very good.
She was great.
But she didn't respond to anything Trump said. She did not react to the speech the president gave. And if she wants to make news, you have to react to what he said instantly. She didn't do it. She had a prepared speech, which was nothing to do with what Trump said. And I think that's why they're not going to get much credit in the world if they keep giving speeches that don't relate to what the president just said. What they should have is Hakeem out there, or Catherine Clark or somebody, with a list of notes, 4 or 5 bullet points. Now, the first thing I want to say about the president's speech is it's all, as Joe McCarthy, or Joe Biden would say, it's all malarkey. Everything he said about Social Security is malarkey. Don't believe a word of it. If a Democrat or a Republican had done something like that, they'd be in jail for life. You can't mess with Social Security checks. That's fraud. And all those Republicans laughing tonight are imbeciles. That's what the Democrats should say, because they're making you think that there's something to this thing. There's nothing to this thing. I think they have to go out like that, point by point, and they have to be based upon the president's speech, because there's only one president. You're reacting to it. You are reacting to the only president we have, and everything else is frivolous. And they don't know that. They said they should pick Slotkin and say, here's the story. You've got to react point by point to the president's speech. That's what you have to do. If you can't do it, we'll get somebody in there who can.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of...
I'm sure he says, I can't move that fast. I can't. If she says that, say, we'll get another one. Because politicians are called on in the alleys and the corridors of the Congress all the time, called upon to react immediately what the president just did. And they know quite how to do it. They're like anchor men, they're anchor women. They know how to finesse something and make it sound polished. They should be able to do that. Here's what the president said, and I'm concerned about. It's not true.
Mm-hmm.
Fact. It would be powerful to have that, because then you'd have in the same news cycle as the president's bullets, the reaction bullets.
Well, we've been talking about domestic issues. There's also a major foreign policy issue that's taking place right now, with the president of the United States choosing to align himself with a dictatorship, our enemy, Russia, at the expense of a democratically elected president of a trusted ally of ours, Ukraine. What's his end game there? What's happening there?
Andy, this is where we got in trouble in the first term. So I'll outline it. With incident upon incident, we had evidence that Trump was working for the Russians. And we had all this, all the stories that make the water cooler, if you would, or the bar room, all the explanations. And everybody said, well, I know why I did it, because they have this evidence on him, or they have this tape on him, or none of that happened. I mean, none of that in a journalistic sense happened. We never had evidence that he was an agent of Moscow. This time around, I was hearing it again on the Hill yesterday, 2 days ago. Up there, I kept hearing it, that kind of thing, and that kind of talk again. Journalists cannot say there's a there if you don't have it. There's all the evidence in the world that he's working for Putin. It looks like he is in, as he said, a coincidental thought with Putin. It's like he wants to have a meeting in the Oval Office where they're sitting there having tea and enjoying each other's company, because the world is no longer divided between East and West. That's what he seems to want. Now, the motive for that, he wants to build a hotel. We used to hear stories like he wants to build a hotel in Moscow. Come on. But nowadays, it's just a sinister belief. Now, I believe that the Republican Party, as we know it today, or as it was a few years ago, or recently, was founded on the idea that NATO was critical. Eisenhower entered the Republican fight for president in 1952 and defeated Robert Taft, who opposed NATO, and everybody understood that Eisenhower, who had led and had just recently led NATO as Supreme Commander, was coming into the party to make it an international party. And he did so effectively, certainly through Herbert Walker Bush, or Herbert W. Bush, or W. Bush. I mean, he seemed to have made his party an international party. Trump's come in and said, America First Party. And it seems not clearly America first. It seems like Moscow first. And so how do you do, if you don't have evidence that he's an agent of Russia, how do we bring it home to people?
Did you see the hearing yesterday where Senator Merkley, I forget who he was talking to, but he laid out like 4 or 5 points of how Trump appears to be a Russian asset. And he literally asked the person, is there something I'm leaving out that would be a sign of somebody, a president who's being a Russian, acting like a Russian? They couldn't answer the question.
Show that he's working for the Russians?
Yeah. What's that?
Did he show that he's working for the Russians or just with them?
No, he laid out all the ththings, like the examples of cutting off aid.
Does he show that he's working
No, there's no proof. We can't prove. It's, the Russia, the Mueller hoax, like that narrative is out there.
As I said, I remember in the first term of Russia, of Putin, they'd be coming into the room at the conventions, and in these different rooms that Trump would be in, they would come in. They would walk in the door. Hi, I'm the Russian this, the Russian that. I said, why is that? I've been in Democratic and Republican conventions for 30 years, and I've never seen a Russian. All of a sudden, they're everywhere. I said, what is this? They're always coming in. Why are they all here? Why do they care? Who is this? Right. There is this weird, and it's not maybe unfair, but he does seem to have an Erstpolitik in his head. His wives, and they just seem to come from the East. I don't understand. He wants to build this hotel in Moscow. Why? Why Moscow? What's the East? Why is the East like Willy Brandt? Why is there an East politic for this president? The first one I've ever seen. No American president has this.
Well, I have a very basic answer to that question. As an armchair psychologist, a weak man worships strong men because that's how he wants to see himself. And he, as oddly as this may seem to people like you and me, he sees Zelensky as a weak man. Putin is strong. Kim is strong.
Got a shirt on, no shirt on, riding a horse. That's what Putin thinks of himself. That's what he wants to look like.
But he's a strong leader, according to Trump. His people, he says jump, they all say how high. That's what Trump wants. He's not interested in real foreign policy. It's about feeding his ego.
He was heading Stasi, Dresden. I was just in Dresden. It's a nice city, but my God, the idea of running Stasi in Dresden and coming out and becoming chief executive of the former Soviet Union, and having as your mission crushing Ukraine and then crushing Georgia and then working your way to the Baltics and taking on Poland. Is that a romantic dream?
Well, yeah, for some. So let me ask you this. Are we at an inflection point where the cowards in Congress, some of them at least, may ultimately not be able to go along with this pro-Russia campaign of Trump's? Like, this is the breaking point for some of them?
Well, some of them. I mean, there's Cassidy in Louisiana. Mm-hmm. There's Tillis in North Carolina. There's the two women, Murkowski and Collins. There's Turner in Indiana. There's some interesting people that if you talk to them sotto voce, you will find them to be as earnest and as thoughtful as I think we are on these issues. They are incapable of speaking the way they think, which means it doesn't matter how hard you wind up the opposition in their hearts, it's not going to matter if they can't speak it, because they are dreadfully afraid of their MAGA people, who Trump winds up every morning, who keeps them going. Mm-hmm. He doesn't work on the senators, he works on MAGA. And MAGA scares the hell out of the senators, because if you read the first chapter of Profiles in Courage, Kennedy's book, which he had a hand in writing the first chapter, it's all about how great being a senator is.
Not today it is. These guys have completely castrated themselves.
The interesting subject matter apparently is enough for most of them. But yeah, you're right. Portman quit. Mitt Romney quit. There are people finally getting out of it. But there are some interesting people like McCormick coming in from Pennsylvania. I don't know if they're going to. McCormick has all the money in the world. He's got a lot more than Trump. And how long can he put on with this? Does he have the ability to sustain the loss of pride?
Yeah, I just feel like at some point that dam is going to break. But my last question to you, tell me whether I'm a naive libtard or not. I have this theory that Trump 2.0 is the gang that can't shoot straight. They are drowning in chaos and incompetence, and ultimately that is what's going to save democracy.
Well, blame what is to blame on some cabinet members. If there's more to blame, you'll blame it on Musk.
How long before that bromance ends?
I think it's starting to crack enough. Trump is making comments like, I'll give him enough slack, but not too much. And it's up to the cabinet members to do the first shot. And I don't know how many people he's actually going to get rid of. I'm sorry, everybody's concerned about people losing their jobs in Washington, but I'm telling you, I don't think he's going to get that far.
You think the courts, which are so far doing a great job for the most part, they're serving as a guardrail?
He's talking today, catch this, last night. He talked about the good people working in government, the good civil servants. This is Trump. It's not saying the deep state and all that stuff, the swamp. He's talking about the good people in government we need to keep in our agencies. Now, where did he get that from? He got it from his cabinet picks.
Yeah. So there are tea leaves we should be reading in this chaos that we're all swirling in.
I'll tell you the thing that matters to me politically, and I'm watching politics. That speech the other night was delivered like a sledgehammer. It was well written. It was well developed. The thing about the young 13-year-old kid who wanted to be a cop, all that stuff was well done. The stuff with Melania, brilliant. Everything worked. He knows how to put on a really good speech for 2 hours.
That's
the American people.
It's a reality show.
And the impact of it, I care what the Democrats said. The impact was strength. He had he was a man of strength up there, and they're going to learn that issue. If you're going to come back at him, you have to come back at him quickly and with strength. And don't talk about social, cultural issues because you're already losing the battle. Talk to him about inflation, talking about tariffs, talking about prices, because you got to get to where he got elected, and that's where he got elected.
Sage advice. Chris, always a pleasure. Come back soon.
Looking good, buddy.
Take care.
Looking good there. Take care.
Bye-bye. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.